On December 10, 2007, there was unusual unrest in the small town of Ludowici, Georgia, USA. Deborah Gail Moody's motorhome was surrounded by yellow police tape, and her car was parked untouched at the side of the road. Officials searched the interior, but everything appeared tidy, in perfect order, almost sterile. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken objects, nothing to indicate violence. It was as if the 42-year-old mother had simply left her home and vanished into thin air. For neighbors and friends, this was unimaginable. Ludowici is a place where everyone knows everyone else. A small town between Savannah and Fort Stewart, with a single traffic light, no industry, and no large businesses. A place where strangers stand out and changes are noticed immediately. The fact that a woman had disappeared without a trace shook the entire community. Officials soon realized that the key to the mystery lay not on December 10th, but a few days earlier. Deborah's mother, Melanie, remembered their last conversation clearly, on the morning of December 4th. As usual, she had called her daughter and asked her to call back as soon as she got home. Deborah simply replied, "Okay," but that call never came. When Melanie, worried, asked her brother Randy to check on Deborah, everything seemed normal at first glance. The trailer was tidy, and there were no signs of a crime. Outside, around the property, there was nothing unusual to be found. But the absence of the woman who had always been reliable and talked to her mother every day immediately gave rise to an uneasy feeling. Deborah was a quiet, introverted person who loved living in seclusion. She had bought a trailer and lived on her uncle's sprawling property, 100 acres of land surrounded by forest. There she sought peace and quiet, far away from the hustle and bustle. But this seclusion, which otherwise offered her security, made her disappearance even more mysterious. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. When investigators searched the house on December 10th, they finally came across a detail that alarmed them. Deborah's keys, credit cards, cash, and even her cell phone were still in her handbag, untouched. Everything a woman would take with her if she disappeared voluntarily had been left behind. At that moment, it was clear to the police Deborah had not simply walked away. Something terrible must have happened. Investigators focused on Deborah Gail Moody's last known movements. On the morning of December 4th, she had started her shift at Fort Stewart Military Base as usual. She worked in the office of a construction company and was known to be reliable and conscientious. Nothing on that day indicated anything unusual. Her supervisor, Rick Dennis, later recalled a small detail. After work, Deborah wanted to drive a colleague home, Gerald Brancham, 42 years old. It was nothing new for Deborah to help others, but this time it would be the last moment she was seen alive. The next day, Gerald showed up for work as usual. Deborah, however, was missing. For everyone who knew her, this was a worrying sign, because she was not the kind of woman to be absent without excuse. Investigators sought to talk to Gerald, but even then, the first contradictions began to emerge. His boss had fired him shortly after Deborah's disappearance, but he was unable to give clear reasons for doing so. When the police checked his address, it turned out that Gerald had disappeared. A neighbor reported that he had packed his things and left in a hurry. For the officers, this was a clear warning sign. They immediately decided to find him. In order to bring the man in for questioning, they asked his former supervisor for help. They contacted Gerald under the pretext that he could pick up his severance pay. Gerald agreed and actually showed up. Investigator Ty Smith addressed him directly. "We need to talk." Gerald appeared calm on the outside. "I have nothing to hide," he explained. He confirmed that Deborah had driven him home. After that, he said he hadn't seen her again. His cell phone had been lost, so no one had been able to reach him. But Smith remained suspicious. The story sounded rehearsed, too smooth. The investigator was convinced Gerald was hiding something. To verify his alibi, Smith let him go for the time being. But no sooner had he returned to the office than he received a call that dispelled his suspicions. It was Deborah's friend Lynn Anderson. She reported that she had seen Deborah on that very evening, after she had dropped Gerald off. Together, they had bought a dog cage and later brought it to Deborah's trailer. This made it clear that Gerald could not have been the last person to see Deborah. The lead that had seemed so suspicious just a moment ago led nowhere. The investigators had to start their search all over again, and the mystery surrounding Deborah grew even greater. After the investigators had to drop the lead on Gerald Brancham, they turned their attention to Deborah's closest circle. Experience shows that family members or partners often play a role in missing person cases. Deborah had close friends, Lori Arrowood and Shelley Lumpkin, with whom she spent time regularly. In conversations with them, a picture emerged of a woman who was under personal stress. Her failed marriage in particular came into focus. Jeff Moody was her second husband. The two had known each other for years and their families were close. They married in 2004 and everything seemed stable at first, but it soon became apparent that Jeff was unable to take responsibility. While Deborah juggled her job, household chores, and raising the children, Jeff remained immature. She had to keep things in order, cook, drive his children to school, and work on top of that. Instead of being a partner, he became a burden to her. In May 2006, Deborah took action. She filed for divorce and moved out of their shared home. By this time, Jeff had already started a new relationship. It was a profound change for Deborah, and tensions escalated. In a small town like Ludowici, such stories do not remain hidden. Rumors spread quickly. Jeff was an obvious suspect for investigators. After all, Deborah had taken out a life insurance policy, naming him as the beneficiary. Could financial greed be a motive? But it soon turned out that the sum involved was only a small amount, just $200 to $300. Hardly a reason for such a drastic crime. Jeff himself remained calm and cooperative during questioning. He insisted he had nothing to do with his ex-wife's disappearance. His presence at a National Guard exercise on the day of Deborah's disappearance was confirmed. This seemed to be another dead end. For investigator Ty Smith and his colleagues, this meant another impasse. Time was running out, and with each day that Deborah was not found, the hope of bringing her back alive diminished. As the days passed, investigators intensified their search for Deborah. The rural area around the trailer was vast, densely wooded, and difficult to access. Only one country road ran through it, lined with bushes and trees. Police combed the area, used dogs, and even requested the assistance of an air police unit. They searched hundreds of acres of land from the air, without success. The community of Ludowici also mobilized. Friends and relatives distributed flyers, collected donations for a reward, and held evening candlelight vigils. Billboards displayed a photo of Deborah smiling and full of life. Everyone who saw it wondered if there was anything they could do to help. The town stood together and yet remained helpless. Weeks passed, and then, in January 2008, another woman disappeared in Georgia. Meredith Emerson, a 24-year-old student. Her case was quickly solved. Gary Michael Hilton, a 61-year-old serial killer who abducted and killed women in remote areas, was arrested. Hilton confessed to Emerson's murder and was soon linked to other crimes. For Deborah's family, this was a shock and at the same time a cruel déjà vu. Deborah had also disappeared in a lonely area, just a few miles from her neighbors. Could Hilton also be her killer? The circumstances seemed similar, but without evidence, this connection remained mere speculation. The case stagnated until months later there was a surprising twist. In August 2008, an inmate from Liberty County came forward. He told investigators that his former cellmate had confessed to the murder of Deborah Moody. The name of this man, Marvin Jeffs. Marvin was already known to the authorities for theft, drugs, and numerous minor offenses. He was a typical repeat offender who oscillated between prison and freedom, and he had indeed had contact with Deborah. As a plumber who had carried out repairs on her trailer several times, friends reported that Marvin had openly bragged about Deborah's disappearance. At parties, he allegedly said that he had raped and killed her. Sometimes he made insinuations, threatening women with the words, "Otherwise, you'll end up like the one who disappeared." This was a turning point for investigators. Many of his acquaintances independently confirmed that he had made such confessions. Everything pointed to Marvin knowing more than he was admitting, but as long as there was no evidence, it remained a suspicion. The clues pointing to Marvin Jeffs initially seemed to be the breakthrough. Investigator Ty Smith arranged a meeting to question him. Marvin did show up, but his behavior was immediately noticeable. He avoided eye contact, stared at the floor, and tapped his foot nervously. When asked about Deborah, he gave evasive answers. He claimed to have barely known her and denied any connection to her disappearance. When Smith increased the pressure, Marvin withdrew. He said he didn't want to say anything more. Finally, the investigator was persuaded to compromise. Marvin would voluntarily take a lie detector test. Surprisingly, he agreed. But when he saw Smith the next day, he suddenly refused to take the test. He only showed up for another appointment, but the results were inconclusive. It later emerged that he had taken sleeping pills the night before, which could have skewed the test results. A third test finally produced a striking result. His reaction to a crucial question deviated from the norm. Nevertheless, this was not enough to bring charges. For the investigators, it was a frustrating game. Hints, contradictions, but no solid evidence. They entered Marvin's house with a search warrant. Rumors said he had recorded videos of himself abusing women. Perhaps there was material there that concerned Deborah, but the search was unsuccessful. Marvin later mocked the police and boasted that they would never find anything. For weeks, the officers followed up on leads. They were told that Marvin had hidden Deborah's body under a concrete slab. Forensic scientists searched the area with special equipment designed to reveal disturbances in the ground. But this lead also came to nothing. In the end, all that remained were rumors, insinuations, and empty words. Marvin Jeffs was a man who liked to make himself important, who wanted to impress people with stories. No one could prove that he was really involved in Deborah's disappearance. It was a bitter setback for the investigators. Once again, they were at a dead end. Almost 3 years after Deborah Moody's disappearance, the same district was shaken by another tragedy. On September 25, 2010, Lori Arrowwood, 42, disappeared from her home in Long County. Her car was parked outside. Her personal belongings were untouched. The scenario was painfully reminiscent of Deborah. Lori was no stranger to Deborah. On the contrary, the two women were friends, often went horseback riding together and spent time with each other. The fact that Lori had now also disappeared led the police to immediately draw parallels. Two women, almost the same age, both from the same area, both with similar appearances. It couldn't be a coincidence. The investigation quickly led to a man from their immediate circle, Kenneth Lumpkin, Lori's neighbor and family friend. He had been doing work at her house on the day she disappeared. When the officers questioned him, he appeared nervous. Finally, he broke down and confessed he had killed Lori. This took the case in an unexpected direction. Lumpkin, himself a husband and father, had not only murdered a friend of the family, but had also participated in the search for her while knowing the truth. For the investigators, this was almost inconceivable. Suspicion immediately fell back on Deborah Moody. Lumpkin was her neighbor, they were friends, and she had disappeared years earlier. Lumpkin initially responded dismissively to cautious questions. He insisted he had nothing to do with Deborah's disappearance. But the pressure remained. In 2013, he finally pleaded guilty to the murder of Lori Arrowwood and was sentenced to life in prison. For a long time, he refused to say anything about Deborah. For her family, this meant years of agonizing uncertainty. It was not until more than a decade after her disappearance in 2019 that the truth finally came to light. Lumpkin accepted an offer. In exchange for information about Deborah, he would not receive a harsher sentence. He read the document, put it aside, and said, "Okay, I'm ready." Then he described what had happened on December 4th, 2007. Under the pretext of discussing Christmas presents, he had gone to Deborah's trailer. There, he had tried to rape her, but failed. Finally, he had dragged her into the trunk of his car, taken her to his parents' empty house, and tried again to abuse her, again without success. In his statement, he finally confessed that he had strangled her and disposed of her body in the woods. Despite multiple search operations at the locations mentioned by Lumpkin, Deborah Moody's remains have not been found to this day. Officially, the case has been considered solved since 2019, even though the family never had the opportunity to bury Deborah. Lumpkin continues to serve his life sentence in a Georgia prison. For the relatives, his confession was confirmation of the truth, but also a bitter realization. In this case, justice means the conviction of the perpetrator, but they are still denied a final farewell to Deborah.